Hey guys, so in this video we're going to be going over how to solve for a missing angle using trigonometry. Now, the first thing that I want to go over is how is this different from finding a side? Well, if you remember when finding the side, usually what we were given is something like, for example, this would be, let's say 35, and then this would be x, right? But in this case, it's actually not going to be this way. So, and actually our x is going to be the angle that we have here. And I believe this was 34. Let's check. All right, let me see. I think it is 34. All right, so now going over this, the question is find the measure of angle A to the nearest degree. Now, before we go ahead and jump into this, we have to go over inverse operations. So let's look at this table for a bit. So we have the table, and let's look at number 1. It says 3, right? So we have a 3 here, and then we have the operation or function that we're doing to 3. In this case, we're adding 2. And then, well, what is the inverse? So how do I get 3 back? What would I have to do to the plus 2 so that I can get rid of it? So if you said subtract by 2, you're correct, right? So if we added 2, the inverse or the opposite of adding 2 is to subtract 2, and our outcome is 3. So it's what we started off with, right? So now imagine if the 3 was instead taken off and we use x. So let's say that we have x. If we add 2 to x, and then after adding 2, we subtract 2, then our outcome is x, right? So we have to follow the same analogy to the other functions. So let's say that we have x here. What happens when we go ahead and square it? Well, you get x squared, right? So think about it if this was 3. So if this was 3, and then the function that you're doing is 3, and then to the power of 2, so that would be 9, right? So what would be the opposite of squaring 3? So how do you get 3 back? So remember, our outcome that we want is to get the 3. So right now 3 squared is 9. So how would we get 3? So what's the opposite of, or the inverse of square? If you said to go ahead and take the square root, then you're correct, right? Because these two would go ahead and cancel and you get 3. But like I said, we're not using 3, we're generalizing this, right? So we're using x. So this is supposed to be x. This is supposed to be x squared. And then x squared, if you take the square root of x squared, you get x. Because this works for any number, right? So we can do this with 4. 4 squared is 16. And then the square root of 16 is 4. So now we have to do it with trigonometric functions. So we have x, and then we go ahead and take sine of x. Well, what happens if I want to get x back? If I want to get x by itself? Because remember, when we're solving, we want the variable to be by itself. So to do that, the opposite of the function of sine x is sine inverse, or sine to the power negative 1, and then the other function inside it, which is sine of x. And this would give us what? Remember, what does an inverse function do? What should you get at the end? In this case, it's going to be x, and that's the case for any inverse function. So okay, so how is this going to help us with our problem? Well, let's look at it. We want to find the measure of A. What is the relationship between 34, 55, and the angle that we're looking for? Let's call the angle, let's call it x. So what is the relationship between them? So first of all, 34 is the opposite, right? It's opposite to the x. And my 90-degree angle is this. So my 55 is my hypotenuse. So 55 is the hypotenuse. So what is the relationship? So opposite and hypotenuse. If you remember, this comes from so, ka, toa. So what is the relationship between them? It's going to be sine, right? So basically what I'm saying is sine of the angle, which in this case is x, is equal to 34 divided by 55. Now, what is 34 divided by 55? Well, we can go ahead and use the calculator. So let's turn it on. So we put 34 divided by 55. And that's going to give us 0.6181. Repeat it. I'm only going to round it up to, or I'm only going to write the first 5 decimal places. Let's do that. So we're only going to write the first 5 decimal places. So it's going to be sine of x is equal to, and we said the first 5, so 61818, right? So these are the decimals. So we want x by itself because we want to find the angle, right? So we need to find a way to leave x by itself. So that's where we use our inverse operation. So what's the opposite of sine of x? The opposite of it is to take this sine inverse of it. So we go ahead and write sine inverse and then sine of x. And then whatever we do to one side, we have to do it to the other side. So this is going to be sine inverse 0.61818. All right, so I did the same function on both sides. Now, the reason why I did this is because remember, when you go ahead and take the inverse operation of 1, all you're going to be left with is x by itself. So these two are going to cancel out. And this is equal to, well, I have to go ahead and put this in the calculator. So that's what I'm going to do. So I grab my calculator. I'm going to go ahead and now I need to write the inverse. So I have to click second. So let's do it with the mouse. Clear. I click second. Inverse of sine. And then 0.61818. Click enter. So I get 38.18. Now make sure that you go ahead and change your calculator to degrees if you have not done that, because it is important. You're not going to get the right answer if it's on radians. So now it says on the question nearest degree. So that means that they want it rounded to the ones place. The ones place is here. So I look at the 8 and then the number next to it is a 1. So if it's below 5, I stay where I'm at. And if it's 5 or greater, you go up. So in this case, I'm going to stay where I'm at. So my answer, this is around 38 degrees. So x is approximately, you can use these if you want, approximately 38 degrees. So that would be my answer. Now, I hope that this made sense. And I will go ahead and give a couple of more examples in the next video. So keep tuned for that. The examples are going to be these. All right, bye guys.